Welcome everybody to this afternoon's BCO NextGen Scotland Committee panel discussion. I am Gary Scott, I'm the BCO NextGen Chair for Scotland and from a fit-out contractor background. I've got with me today some of our fellow committee members in Scotland. We've got Teresa Bradshaw-Wong, who is a real estate lawyer at CMS, who recently worked on the WeWork Edinburgh and represents landlords and occupiers. We've got Mark Beaton, who's Associate Director of T&T. Mark started T&T about 18 years ago, so we've not quite figured out what age he is yet. He has recently been involved in TECA and also is currently working on the Barclays scheme in Glasgow. We've got Lucy Galloway of Space. She is the Head of Interior Design there and is working on Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service, remodelling their estate, and covers public and commercial sector projects at Space. We've got David Sim of Atelier 10. David, in his 8 years at Atelier 10 as a senior mechanical engineer, has covered projects such as the largest primary school in Scotland and the Prince and Princess of Wales Hospice. And lastly, we've got Neal. Neal's got two roles at Threesixty Architecture. He's the architect or one of the architect team and also doubles up as the resident DJ at Threesixty. If you've ever been invited back, you'll know what I'm talking about. And we've also got a couple of members who weren't able to make it today, which is Kirsty Gover of Cooper Chroma, and we've also got Kirsty Lamont of JLL. We now find ourselves living in some biggest challenges that we've ever faced. Certainly we've got a lot of new buzzwords, terminology, a new normal, social distancing, key workers, Zoom calls. There's been quite a lot to take in as a generation and also as a nation. It's not what we envisaged for 2020. I had set out quite a lot of New Year resolutions when I was in the Island Sky in December. 2020 would be the year I'd spend a lot more time with my family. I'd spend a lot more time reevaluating how much work and the relationship that we've got with work, and also would be the final year of being a NextGen member at BCO, which is probably a bit of a relief, to be fair, because no one quite ever believes me when I say I'm in the NextGen and our age bracket, we just get some blank looks. So 2020 I don't think has been lost so far yet. We've all been able to spend some family time at home, a lot of absent time with family that we've not been able to meet up with. I think we've all had a chance to reevaluate the work that we do, how we work, our relationship with work in terms of our personal working practices. And in terms of the BCO now finds itself in a position where it's there to provide guidance and lead as we move forward in the commercial property sector. We were focusing a lot on climate change prior to COVID-19. We were focusing a lot on carbon neutral, focusing on health and well-being of our employees, our buildings, the city centres. And a fair amount of change was coming in the commercial property sector. Now, it certainly had a bigger change recently from the situation that we found ourselves in. So it's now going forward for me that there's terrible circumstances that we've been in, and there's no doubt about that. But it's really now how we move forward as a nation, as an industry, and as a commercial property sector. And I think the momentum's there, certainly, that the working from home was a difficult conversation with a lot of employers prior to this. So there's a lot of good that we can make out of this. As the next generation, we should be at the forefront of that. But I'm very cautious that there's a lot of next generation members on furlough. There's risk in the job market, there's a lot of sort of risk in the industry. So we've got to come together just to make sure that we don't lose some of our key talent to other industries, as has happened in the past. But overall, for me, the office is not dead yet. For me, it's just taking some time out, it's reevaluating its next phase. And I think we will go forward strong from here. Today, we've got 5 different disciplines on the panel, all allegedly under 35 like myself. We've got a lawyer, project manager, interior designer, mechanical engineer and an architect. Certainly not a great night out, but in terms of a Zoom pub quiz team, I think we'd make a formidable team. So I will jump into the questions now. We're going to start with Teresa. Teresa, what are you seeing in the market in terms of landlord and tenant negotiations and transactions? How do you also then see that going forward? You're sort of almost at the higher end level way before it filters down to the likes of myself and some of the design teams. So it would be great to get that viewpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Gary. As I was gathering my thoughts for this afternoon's discussion, I took an opportunity to reflect really on what we've been through over the last couple of months. And looking back in that first week we were put into lockdown, to me it felt like the whole industry took a sharp intake of breath, and there was quite a pause for at least a week where everybody was adapting to working from home for an indefinite period of time, where we got round the initial IT issues. And for any transaction that had a construction element, we were flung into this uncertainty, you know, could we or could we not legally go on site? Did our force majeure clause cover pandemics, and, you know, who could be responsible for an extension of time? There were loads of questions flying around in those initial week, and I think parties were quite reluctant to act, hence there was a pause. But after we got over that initial pause, we went into a period where there was a lot of activity. It felt like there was a big push to get anything that was close to contracted or close to completing over the line just as soon as possible. Parties were seeing deals being put on pause, being wholesale renegotiated, and unfortunately some deals were ultimately aborted because of COVID. And the world looked like a very different place with the UK in lockdown than it did when we began 2020 and when a lot of these heads of terms were agreed. And that generally caused quite a lot of anxiety in the market, I would say. So deals were either not happening, being renegotiated, or going very, very quickly. Over the last couple of weeks, as we've moved into May, I'd say that general air of panic has gone away now. Parties seem a lot more settled. There's a bit more certainty, I feel, but we're not seeing as much activity in the market generally. We're not seeing as many deals coming into legals, and we're certainly not seeing as many heads of terms being agreed as we usually would at this time of year. So I think we'll just need to brace ourselves and see how the market reacts to this next phase which we're going into as we ease out of lockdown, and see what the rest of 2020 has in store for us. In terms of landlord and tenant relations, generally speaking, most landlords have been very willing and supportive of their tenants through the immediate impacts of this pandemic, certainly. Landlords have been willing to share the pain with their tenants as such, and we've seen that in the form of rent deferments, rent concessions, at least for the next couple of months. However, taking a slightly longer term view, tenants that are in the midst of negotiating new leases have been asking for COVID clauses in these new leases, and they're trying to protect themselves essentially against a second wave or any future pandemic. And if there were to be a future pandemic, tenants are now looking for automatic suspensions of rents and other obligations which would require them to physically enter the premises. So we're looking at things like repairing obligations, decoration, yielding up if you are unfortunate enough to have a lease expiry date that falls in the middle of a government-imposed lockdown. Unsurprisingly, landlords are pretty adverse to granting any automatic suspension of rights, particularly around rent payments. And landlords have started looking towards the insurance market to see if this is something that insurers can bear. Is it a risk that can be insured against? And if so, at what cost? It's looking like it could be quite a costly premium if it is available at all. So it's another dispute to have between landlords and tenants, who bears the cost of that insurance premium. So long term, I think COVID clauses might be something that we start to see in leases that will last probably for at least the next 5 to 10 years, if they are, of course, accepted as a norm in the market. But that's, jury's out on that one. I think we'll have to wait and see if these clauses become acceptable to the market as a whole.
I think these clauses are ultimately going to be the tenant pushing back onto the landlord and the landlord pushing back onto the tenant. Nobody's really going to take responsibility. It's an interesting point you raise about the insurance, but again, it's probably not something the insurance companies want to pick up now either. For you as well, Teresa, what's been your biggest challenge during the time? That's something that, you know, on a next gen basis and maybe a bit more on a personal level, you know, we're all human. What have you found to be your biggest challenge and maybe even the biggest success that you'll take away from this period and a lot of time at home?
I'd say the biggest challenge for us recently has been getting documents signed and delivered to where they need to be. So you think you've done a great job negotiating through all the tricky thorny issues, and you finally get to an agreed position, and then that last hurdle is such a logistical issue. But in Scotland, we are a little bit old-fashioned in the sense that contracts and deeds that relate to land need to be signed wet ink and then delivered. So things like DocuSign and Adobe Sign, unfortunately, don't quite meet the requirements. So we've spent a lot of time working with couriers over the last couple of weeks. It is getting slicker. We are getting a bit better at it, but I think that's certainly been a challenge. In terms of biggest successes, I think this collaborative approach we've seen between landlords and tenants and professions generally across real estate has been a big positive. We've managed to get a lot of those agreements between landlords and tenants documented and in place before the May quarter date, which falls at the end of this week. So I think that is probably the biggest positive we can take away from this. On a more personal note, I think managing to work 5 days a week in the same room as my husband and not kill him for singing every time his favourite tune comes on via Spotify or on the radio, or whatever he's listening to via his headphones, that's probably a great success. Equally, he has not killed me for apparently being a passive-aggressive typist. That remains to be seen. But yeah, just generally using our living room as the home office / home cinema / functional fitness area. It's probably been my biggest personal success over the last few weeks.
Good, thanks. We're going to do questions towards the end, but we have had a question raised for you, Teresa, already. So Gillian Stewart has written, many of the occupiers' clients are considering a phased return to work just now, and this is fine if the occupier can control the user experience from the front door to the workspace. What are the landlords of multi-tenanted buildings doing in terms of operation in the common areas to reassure tenants that it's safe to work?
Yeah, multi-let properties are quite tricky, and I think landlords should be speaking to all their tenants in the building and trying to gauge what each of the tenants are expecting the landlord to deliver. Increased services by way of cleaning and what else in the common areas I think is a basic, but landlords should be starting to talk about is it appropriate for temperature checks, for example, to happen at the entrance to the building? Is it a service that the tenants are willing to pay for through the service charge? And I think the landlords need to ultimately remember that they are providing services to their clients as tenants as such. It will depend on the nature of each building. So newer buildings that carry a heavier service charge and more expensive service charge, you would expecting a higher level of service. Whereas I think some of the older properties where there are service charge caps across the board, landlords might be looking to provide just what they seem as reasonable. But ultimately, I think it's a collaborative approach between landlords and tenants would be very much welcomed for multi-let buildings.
Thanks. We'll now move on to Mark. Mark, what impacts are you seeing in terms of the larger projects? That's your area of expertise. What impact have you had so far, and how do you see the impacts going on the sort of longer term on the larger scale work?
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, I think on the larger projects, obviously sites being closed, that's certainly the biggest issue at the minute. There's a lot of design and procurement work can continue. Obviously, architects working at home, subcontractors pricing things can happen, but sites being closed is definitely having a significant impact. Obviously, looks like we may be back on site in the next few weeks, at least to get things enabled to allow a start on site. We've been working with a lot of contractors just in terms of putting in place suitable measures to maintain social distancing, how operatives get to work, and then just general logistics on site. Working on sort of office buildings, etc. Depends on the stage you're at, can impact how that can work. And just having sufficient areas for operatives to work, and obviously the size of materials, how many men does it take to lift something? Can you buy smaller bits of material, etc.? So that's certainly a challenge. I think longer term, it's difficult to say. Excuse me. Contractors have obviously taken a lot of pain in terms of having to shut down. So far, there's been a few casualties, obviously reported in the news in terms of going into administration, etc. A lot of clients have been trying to assist where they can in terms of cash flow, but they're also feeling the pain in terms of now they're not going to get their buildings when they had anticipated, etc. Similar to what Teresa was saying on contracts, I think COVID clauses will come into building contracts in terms of how does that work? Do contractors get an extension of time, or how is it mitigated or paid for? Where does that all lie? We've started to see that already, and how that is going to be addressed in contracts going forward. But I think longer term, it's almost what are we going to build? Is it going to be modular? Can we then do things more in factories where you can work safer? I know obviously there's a lot of work that's already gone into that, and it's an existing offering, but will that become the norm as opposed to more traditional ways of building things? And just even simple things in offices. I know we've got one client who's just looking at, can we just automate all the doors in a building so nobody has to open a door by touching it? Obviously it works to a point, but it's something that's relatively simple that could make quite a difference to how a building works. And obviously the other element is working from home. I just can't imagine that's going to be the new normal. People need to speak. I know we have these calls, everyone can see each other, but it's just not the same as being in the same room as someone. You could obviously still sit 2 meters apart and have a meeting if that's what's needed, but I just can't see that going away forever. You need to sit with your clients. You need to look at drawings with them. You need to explain why things are happening. And even from just going to site, we need to go to site to do evaluations, to check progress, to check quality. And you can obviously do it to a point using, say, a camera, but ultimately you need to be physically there at some point. So I think they're all sort of important points. But I suppose at this time, we don't know exactly what the future brings. Obviously, there is an element of uncertainty, but we've got a lot of clients that are sort of pushing through this to deliver the buildings that they had proposed. And yeah, there will be change, but we just will manage that as it comes.
Sure. I think certainly, like you say, the COVID clauses and the COVID, it's going to be in everything, isn't it? There's going to be an exclusion or it's getting that agreed. I think that's where probably Teresa will come back in is in the future. I'll certainly be busy spending a lot of time on COVID. In terms of personal challenges and successes, Mark, for you, I know you've been at home with your wife and kids as well. So how's that fared for yourself?
I think challenge-wise, yeah, everyone I suppose says it's been tough, and it has been tough at times. I had to run off. My son decided to wake up early and run into the room, so I had to just dash to deal with that. But yeah, it's a challenge. It maybe means working slightly different hours, having the mobile phone in one hand and child in the other. But you just need to get on with it. There's people that are much worse off, so it's not something that's overly fazed me. I think conference calls at the start, I used to never have my camera on, and neither did anybody else. But as sort of time's gone on, I think it's more real when you have your camera on. You can see people's faces, and okay, you're not in the same room, but I think it helps, and it just gives you a little bit more. There is really a meeting happening. I think other challenges, not specific to myself, but just like graduates and graduate recruitment, learning on the job. I think that's going to, this year, obviously be a real difficult element that people need to look at. How is that going to work? How do you induct someone remotely? How do you then keep them involved with a project going forward? But these are just challenges that face every industry, and we just need to look at how that can work. In terms of success, well, on a very personal note, biggest success is that I've managed to teach my son to ride his bike. So that certainly goes up as a big success. It's been a big focus, although this has been a sort of pretty tough episode for most people, it's been trying to keep or use advantage of it, spending more time with family and obviously the weather's been unbelievably good considering what the start of the year was like. So I'm sure that's made a big difference. I'm sure contractors are feeling the pain even more on the basis that it was a horrendous first 3 months, and this following 3 months have been such good weather. They could have got so much work done, but have not been able to. So we've been outside as much as possible. But I think just I have nothing to really complain about. I think the people that are really doing a good job are contractors, which I don't say that very regularly, but they seem to have sort of taken it on the chin, and a lot of teamwork. How are we going to get around this? How are we going to get sites moving again? We've got action plans in place. We've got all our risk assessments, method statements, and it's just going to be a case of when we're able, we'll get sites moving again, and hopefully that will be in the next few weeks.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. I'm just going to move on to Lucy. Lucy, you're obviously interior design. In terms of the workplace design, I know it's temporary just now. You know, everybody's run out and bought a Perspex screen. Some of the big tech companies are allowing everybody to work from home for the foreseeable. Maybe that changes in the future, but that's certainly the message for now. What are you seeing, or what do you envisage in terms of interior design? You know, the reduction of hot desking or increased space per metre squared per person. I know it's quite early days, like Mark's saying there, we're not fully sure of the idea picture, but if you could share some thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think our relationship with any environment is going to change after we get out of COVID-19. And that's going to have an impact on our place of work. And it was interesting. We've listened to loads of blogs, and there's been so much publications about what the office is going to look like. But it was Gensler's report that staged it in 3 stages. And I think this our concept of time is completely changed. And I think there's this immediate now at the moment where essential work, and we've been lucky to work with clients on quick return to work plans and see what they can do quickly to get staff back in their office safely. There's the kind of short-term effect, and then there's what the future is. And right now, the immediate thing is all about safety and health. So what that is key, and reassuring staff that the environment is a safe place for you to come into has been first and foremost. And that's not saying, you know, we need to reconfigure the whole office. It's actually pausing and saying, right, what have we got and what can we layer up? So signage, there's going to be an influx of signs. We're used to them when we go to the supermarket, but that's not going to be forever. But for now, that needs to be the reassuring factor. Yes, we've all seen the Perspex screens. That's not the solution. And I think, you know, that's not what we want to revert back to, going into Perspex cubicle boxes. We've, I think, gone so far in workplace design to be open and collaborative, and it to be a place of community, that come that future, it's going to get that sense of community back. I think we all agree the one thing we're missing from working from home is the culture, the energy, the just going, oh, do you want to grab that coffee, and that ad hoc ability. So that's absolutely going to come back. And I think, yes, maybe there'll be a complete decrease in bench desking. We've proved we can do the tasks working from home, and it's been really focused on the individual. But now let's focus on the team. And I think workplace is going to be a place for people to come together collaboratively, for that community to be created. Where we were seeing before, you know, I was thinking back to 2008, the credit crunch, and it was like, what happened then? And yeah, fit outs did scale right back, and people were doing graphic work just to show that there still is an energy. And I think, you know, we're not going to go back, we're going to keep going forwards. And I think the workplace will have to be more for more. You know, it's going to have to be the draw for the graduates, for Generation Z. They'll like that they want to be able to go to a workplace that's motivational and inspiring. That might not be their desk. That might be amazing training facilities or amazing conference facilities, but types of social spaces within the office will be on the rise. And materials, like every threshold is going to be considered, and you know, whether that's kind of looking back in time on what materials are the best antibacterial, you know, whether it's, you know, the brass handle on a door handle, you know, whether it's natural leathers on upholstery or actually natural fabrics we were looking at fabrics made from cacti, because the antibacterial quality is higher than a faux fabric. So all these things, I think it's a really interesting time.
That's good. Hopefully let's take the needles out of the cactus first.
Yeah.
some cheap imitations. No, it's good. It's interesting, and it's different to hear in terms of material choice. That's something that we maybe not necessarily associate with the change in the way that we're working. In terms of you know, similar questions for you personally, being out of the office, in terms of your role, what sort of challenges have you come across, and on a personal level as well? What have you got to take away from it?
Yeah, so I think certainly the challenges, sort of sticking with the material nature of interior design, is sitting around a table with a client and going, like, feel that, do you like this shade of green or that shade of green? And video conferencing is fantastic, but to not have that sensory real life experience with a client is challenging. But with working with suppliers, ordering samples to them, then having a Teams call while they've got one sample and the same sample, we can talk about it. But yeah, that's been challenging, and I hope that returns really soon.
You're not able to pass the samples around. These are, as I say, everybody got their own.
We'll all have gloves or something, you know, something. Yeah. But yeah, no, but the tactile nature, I think, is certainly been the biggest challenge, and missing the office banter, just good chats, impromptu catch-ups, those ad hoc meetings with peers, that shall we just grab a quite quick pint after work to chat, you know, that's what we're missing.
No, I agree. I think fostering a business culture, it can't be done on Zoom. It's not.
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, but the biggest success is that we have proved that we can do it, and I think each and every one should be really proud of that, because this is a health crisis. No one is to blame for this. So I think the word collaboration, will be with big C this time, because every industry, every individual, we're all going to have to work together, because we've all been affected by it. And I think I was listening to an article the other day about, I had to Google what FOMO meant, but you know, there is this, people are, oh, you know, they're working, they're not working, and there's going to be a wave of that. And I really, you know, I think if we can all kind of get through this time and work together, we'll be the better for it.
Good. Well, thanks. I'm going to move to David. David is mechanical services engineer. So David, I would see maybe there'd be some change in terms of the way that the mechanical ventilation or mechanical services could be delivered in the future. What have you started to see, and how do you see the future for that sort of field?
Yeah, I think the changes that we've seen in the services side have been, there's the immediate purposes of safely reoccupying buildings from lockdown. And I think some of the lessons that we take from that will probably go forward into future designs. Our institute, Sibsey, they've produced a series of guides for businesses to understand sort of how workplaces can be repopulated whilst minimising risks. Things just even like checks being carried out on life safety systems, water being rechlorinated, general routine maintenance being carried out because they've probably been left potentially for weeks, if not months. Probably the most prevalent recommendation is around the ventilation systems, as you touched on, because of the possibility of airborne transmission of the disease. The advice right now is it's slightly loose in terms of it. They basically just say increase the ventilation as much as you possibly can, and so that the flow of outside air prevents pockets of stagnant air, that kind of thing. And potentially older systems where it's a lot of recirculation of air just to try and increase the amount of outside air coming in. Another one being a lot of systems will be set for night setback so that it generally ramps down quite a lot, if not turns off overnight. They're saying let's have it on all the way 24 hours a day. Ultimately, it's going to lead to increase in energy bills, but I think that method, certainly in the short term, is going to be used, and if not, going forward as well. Because I think the longer term changes are going to be a combination probably of design related interventions and also service engineering interventions. Things like open plan working spaces might be slightly different, limiting number of occupants in meeting spaces, that kind of thing. I think it's more than anything else, it's going to be a collaborative approach, sort of like Lucy touched on. And I think it will be a whole design team approach. I'm working on a couple of schools and they're already talking about how do we adapt the school to have reduced numbers, how, if it is opening next year, how do we set it up furniture wise so that it's 15 instead of 30 in that classroom, that, just small things like that. So I think it's going to be ensuring that the future workplace as well and current can be adapted to suit. I think the other thing as well, I think there's going to be a lot more onus on building managers to ensure protocols are being adhered to and all systems are operating correctly, because ventilation systems especially could prove to be so vital. So I think there will be a lot more onus on building managers.
Is there anything on a personal side then? Obviously you've decanted the office along with the rest of the office at A10. In terms of you pulling together design, how have you coped well, and in terms of your personal situation, how is things for you moving out of the office?
Yeah, I mean, probably the biggest challenge is just adapting to working on your own in a restricted space, all day. Like everyone's touched on, you're used to working in an office of 40 in an open plan space. A lot of collaboration goes on, and it's great. But in saying that, don't get me wrong, Microsoft Teams is a great tool, easy way to get video conferencing set up, chat with a colleague, but you do definitely miss that personal approach. The same goes for external meetings as well. It's a lot easier to discuss a project, report, etc. with the client and design team face to face rather than a video conference. So I'd say it's the lack of human interaction that I found to be the biggest challenge, as well as finding out I don't suit a shaved head.
Sorry, hairdressing is one problem that I've not faced. Fortunately, the wife has done. Ashley's done our boys a couple of times, some better than other. But I see Neal has stayed true to his cause there. He's doing well for it. Just moving on to Neal. Neal, you are the architect, or one of the architects. Sorry, not the only architect at Threesixty Architecture. For you, obviously similar to the rest of the team though, collaborative working, designing with multiple designers on schemes. You've got the design pitching process from the works. How, as a team at Threesixty and yourself, how have you managed that in terms of working collaboratively with the rest of the office?
Thanks, Gary. I was quite keen to kind of just explain our experiences in 3 different settings really. So going to briefly touch on the internal design team and how we're working internally at Threesixty, a wider design team, and then a more kind of external statutory public setting. Kind of just starting in terms of the internal team at Threesixty, it's obviously pen to paper is always the most fluid way to design. That's how we start every project, and I don't think anything is ever going to replace that. So it's been definitely a moment of kind of adapting to almost being in a design silo as such. Almost you're designing by yourself, and where we've really trying to be focusing on the last 8 weeks or so is understanding how can we recreate the kind of incidental design moments that happen within the studio environment. There is lots of technology out there. Microsoft Teams has a feature which I'm going to try and share my screen just briefly to kind of show. Hopefully everyone can kind of see this, but this is one tool that we're kind of starting to adapt where we can effectively sketch over images in real time, markups, all of the things that would happen in a kind of design crit environment can now happen on the computer, which is a great tool, and I think we're using it well to kind of do markups and allow continuity through the whole kind of project team. I think where it probably or the challenges that kind of come into play is just the different technology savviness of people within the office, where we've got a lot of great designers that are coming to the end of their career perhaps, and it's trying to educate and bring everyone up to speed to the same kind of same understanding and level. And I think we've actually implemented a new class called the Threesixty Academy, where we now run lots of lessons on Photoshop and Microsoft Teams and how to kind of understand how we can use the software that's available. Because I think it's for the short term anyway, it's the way that we need to kind of adapt. I think the other benefit internally as well, I have been working, we've got 2 studios, one in Glasgow and one in Inverness. Project that I've been working on for the past couple of months is actually with the Inverness studio, and I think it's completely kind of broken down. There's, in terms of collaboration, cross-studio collaboration, those barriers which were kind of, they weren't really barriers as such, but because of the studio environment, perhaps we weren't, the collaboration has definitely kind of improved, and we've been forced into a situation where there technically isn't any barriers to the studios. And I think that goes moving into kind of a wider design team setting as well, working with a lot of clients kind of London based, and the geographical barriers of working in Scotland I think are now lifted, and I think that's a massive positive kind of coming out of this, where hopefully people are familiarising themselves with the tools that we have to our disposal, and the kind of the whole kind of design team process and design process even is proven to be quite successful remotely. I think there's definitely going to be it's the short-term solution, and I think there's hopefully some benefits out of it that will be applied in the long term. In terms of the wider design team, I think there's elements of the kind of design process, particularly concept coordination between other consultants, has proven to be quite fluid, where you can share a screen in a design team meeting, and you can do kind of real-time overmarks where people know exactly about where you're talking. I think probably the biggest challenge I've noticed is that people's perception of time and availability has changed massively, where suddenly everyone assumes that you're at their disposal instantly almost. And I think this is quite an interesting point that probably a lot of people in the call are feeling, where because we're all working remotely, to have a quick catch-up call in 10 minutes is acceptable because it's not a pre-planned meeting in a boardroom in an office. And I think that's something that we probably need to view carefully over the next 6 to 12 months, and understand that try and get back to the kind of the meeting schedules that we previously had. I know, just speaking to a colleague, that Glasgow Caledonia have actually implemented a ban on meetings on Fridays, for example, to try and make sure that people aren't actually thinking about the actions over the weekend. And I think we maybe just need to try and revisit and understand how that kind of meeting process works. But I think it's nothing the face-to-face interaction and the kind of the building relationships between people is probably the thing that I'm missing the most from that kind of design team environment. Although you can see people over Microsoft Teams and you get a bit of an insight into everyone's personal life almost in their living room, but that kind of interaction between people is a massive kind of miss just now. And then moving on to kind of a more external and statutory design process, the project that I've been working on has just gone into for community consultation, and we've been very engaged with the planners. This is with Highland Council, who have actually the whole design process, I would say, is kind of improved almost, where there seems to be a lot more kind of responsiveness between planners and the design team. The consultation, we've just launched a separate kind of web page for the project. So the whole consultation is now online with a kind of a series of documents you can download, and also Microsoft Forms to questionnaires, which is exciting to see that change, but it's also it's obviously widening the consultation to kind of digital community, which it will be interesting to see how that actually works, is where consultation is normally on a very kind of local scale, and suddenly we're moving into a more national environment. So it'll be interesting to see how the feedback from that ties into the wider project.
And on a personal level, personal note, how have you coped with the remote working?
I think it's definitely been there's been a lot of kind of adapting, and I think we're starting to find the tools to kind of help us get back to the kind of the design process that we previously had, and I think one of the kind of the most successful things, and I'm quite proud that Threesixty have really pushed it, is the whole keeping the culture that we had. Every Monday we have a Monday morning forum where everyone checks in, regardless whether you're on furlough or not, where everyone catches up and hears what's happening in the week ahead and what's been happening. We also have a kind of a virtual design crit bay, so anyone can join that. Anyone can review the designs that we're working on, post comments. We also have the kind of the traditional Friday beers and stuff, where we've recreated our own virtual pubs with Zoom virtual backgrounds. So I think as much as we can, we're trying to kind of recreate the culture that we had in the studio. But I think it's also been challenging, and I think probably the biggest challenge for me has been it's kind of from a personal development level, how I learned in the studio was listening to people's phone calls, it was listening to people's conversations, and I think this is one, probably particularly for kind of graduates coming out of this, it's going to be the biggest challenge, is how can you recreate that studio environment digitally, and how do you kind of allow people to learn more naturally and incidentally, I think is going to be the biggest challenge kind of coming forward.
Right, thanks. Just before we move on to questions for the panel, there is a mentoring scheme that the BCO have launched recently, starting off down in London. There will be some Scottish mentors added to that soon as well, so if there's anyone that is interested in getting in touch on that, then please do so on the BCO website. There will also be a couple of other webinars upcoming from Scotland as well in the months ahead, as we obviously move from face-to-face events and a rescheduling of the awards ceremony and a lot of other things that have happened in the industry for there. We've got a question, we'll probably spend about an hour, maybe a couple of minutes or so, but we've got a question in from April Burns, in terms of asking what the view from the panel on occupiers spending considerable sums to retrofit offices for this mid-term phase, and then considering what the end term may look like, which will be completely different in the event of a vaccine. Does anybody want to jump in? Mark, are you seeing any of the sort of short-term retrofit? Is that factored in yet to yourself?
I think I'd imagine there will be a number of clients that look at short term, and obviously looking at just shops as an example, they've obviously put these perspex screens everywhere. I think there will be an element of short term review, but it's all down to the individual businesses in terms of, are they able to operate remotely? So therefore, do they hold their cash to look at a longer term implications? Do we need more space? Do we need to just have less people in the existing space? Do we get rid of meeting rooms and create more workspace? I think each individual organisation will have its own view. We've not seen a lot yet. Everyone is still probably looking at the short-term implications in terms of, do they change anything? Do they just need to, or how do they operate their buildings? In terms of design, I think there'll need to be some element of change, but we're probably just not quite there yet in having a clear direction.
Lucy, yourself,
so we've been fortunate. It's been with existing clients where we've been doing return to work space plans, so assessing their current configurations and seeing how safely they can get back to the office in this immediate and short-term phase. I think any longer than that, it will, as Mark said, be completely dependent on that organisation's policies that they embrace. And you know, we're hearing so many companies are putting staff questionnaires out. Yes, there's the logistical things. Can they work from home? Do they have the IT? Do they have the environment? And then they'll be assessing that to say, okay, what is that return to work? What does that look like for them? And then there'll be ongoing discussions whether that's quick fix solutions for these kind of short-term plans. But I think the overall fit-outs or larger fit-out projects, I think, will come after that to the future.
Thanks. Lucy, we've got a question from Fraser Davey. Thanks, Fraser. And Fraser's question is about business development, which is obviously understandably taken a back seat over the last few months, and how have any of the panel adapted to that, and how do we think it will change in the next few quarters? For myself, I'm in the process of just about to start a new business, even for myself, and that will be something that I'll be looking at in terms of the business development. But I would see it as being similar. You know, you're going to have to try and get those Zoom calls booked in. You're going to have to fight around everybody's diary, and you're going to really have to try hard at it. I think the market has still been buoyant with tender inquiries before COVID-19. The market, in my opinion, was very hot. It was very difficult to secure subcontractors, and supply chain quite a lot was on a 6 to 8 week lead-in time just to get them. So that there was a lot of work in the market prior to this. You know, there's a lot of public sector work out there just now in terms of that short-term alterations. And I think the business development will be an interesting thing going forward. You know, it's not an essential meeting in a sense, but equally it's essential to the business and economy. In terms of business development for the rest of you guys, is anyone, you know, any thoughts on the matter?
I think it's everyone that's kind of Lucy and a lot of everyone else said. It's everyone is kind of, you want to be checking in on people, and I think people take that really well, and I think it's kind of moved us into a slightly more personal setting with clients and other consultants, but taking the time to kind of check in and see how people are doing doesn't really go amiss, and I think we've been doing that over the past 8 weeks or so. I think the other thing is trying to come up with events or ideas that bring people together as a larger group. Last week, I don't know if anyone saw, but we had a fundraising challenge called Rainbow Week. And every lunchtime we had a Zoom call with about 80 people dressed in colourful clothes, which was absolutely ridiculous and kind of chaotic, but it worked. And I think it was about trying to bring that wider kind of construction industry together and into the virtual room environment that you might you might miss from kind of committee room 29, for example. But I think it's people are adapting, and I think group calls like that do work quite well.
No, it's good. It was great to see as well, and you're right. You have brought a lot of people together with that. In terms of questions, we'll probably leave it there just now. I know time is ticking on for us, so I'd just like to thank the panel for coming together. So the panel are the NextGen committee members in Scotland, and it's not often that we all get together in the same place at the same time, albeit via Zoom. And thanks to Camilla behind the back as well. She covers our NextGen events and is working in the background on this just now. And then lastly, just thanks to everyone who's joined us today. This has been our first webinar. We were talking about Zoom back in January at a larger committee meeting, and we sort of joked that this would never work, Zoom. And it's now May, and it's the main platform that you'll see us all on going forward for a considerable time. So thanks. Please look after yourself, please stay safe, and then please be kind to others in the coming weeks and months ahead.